The woman should have died before sunrise. That was what the men in Black Creek had decided when they watched her stumble out of town through blowing snow with blood on her sleeve and a leather-bound ledger clutched against her chest. Not one of them offered help. Not when she fell beside the church steps. Not when her husband stood beneath the hotel awning and announced loud enough for everyone to hear that she was a thief, a liar, and a woman whose mind had finally broken. Some laughed. Others looked away. A few believed him. The snow kept falling. The ledger slipped from her numb fingers once, exposing a page covered with names, dates, and figures written in careful ink. She grabbed it immediately. Too quickly, as if those pages mattered more than her own life. That was the moment Elias Whitfield smiled. It was a small smile. Cold. Satisfied. The smile of a man who believed a problem had finally solved itself. She won to survive the mountain, he told the crowd. Nobody challenged him. Nobody asked why a husband seemed pleased to watch his wife disappear into a blizzard. Nobody asked why two strangers mounted horses and quietly followed the road she had taken. And nobody noticed the third rider waiting beyond town limits, a man wrapped in a dark buffalo coat, a man who had spent years learning how to read danger, a man who recognized hunters when he saw them. Caleb Hurst watched the riders through drifting snow from the ridge above. He had not lived near Black Creek in nearly 7 years. Most people believed he preferred isolation. That was only partly true. The deeper truth was simpler. Caleb had spent too much of his life investigating the worst things men could do to one another. Eventually he had grown tired of hearing lies dressed up as respectability. So he built a cabin high in the Bitterroot Mountains and disappeared. Or tried to. Yet something about the scene below disturbed him. 3 riders. 1 fleeing woman. And fear. Real fear. He could see it even from a distance. The woman wasn't he running towards somewhere. She was running away. There was a difference. A dangerous one. Caleb waited until the town vanished behind curtains of snow. Then he followed. The storm worsened as daylight faded. Tracks disappeared beneath fresh drifts. Wind screamed through the pines. Most travellers would have turned back. The woman never did. She kept moving. Kept falling. Kept standing again. By nightfall she vanished completely. Caleb found her less than an hour later. Not on the trail. Not beside the river. Inside an abandoned trapper-esque cabin half buried beneath snow. The door hung crooked. The roof leaked. The fireplace had collapsed years ago. She had crawled inside anyway. The ledger remained trapped beneath one arm. Even unconscious. She refused to release it. Caleb knelt beside her. Her lips were blue. Her breathing shallow. Frostbite had begun forming on 2 fingers. Another few hours and she would be dead. He noticed bruises beneath her collar. Older bruises. Not caused by the storm. His jaw tightened. The mountains were full of accidents. Those weren't tea accidents. Carefully, he pried the ledger loose. A folded paper slipped free. For an instant he considered ignoring it. Then he saw a seal stamped in faded blue wax. Federal. His pulse slowed. He unfolded the document. The page contained only a few lines. Most had been damaged by moisture, but one sentence remained readable. 19 confirmed fatalities. Intentional structural failure suspected. Investigation suspended. Caleb stared at the words. Snow rattled against the cabin walls. The sound suddenly seemed very far away, because he knew exactly which case that sentence referred to. 7 years earlier, a bridge collapse had killed 19 people. The investigation had vanished before reaching court. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses recanted. Careers ended. Including his own. He looked toward the unconscious woman. then toward the ledger. A terrible possibility formed in his mind. Before he could explore it further, a noise echoed outside. Horse hooves. Several. Not passing by. Stopping. Caleb extinguished his lantern immediately. The cabin plunged into darkness. The riders approached slowly, deliberately, as though they already knew exactly where their prey was hiding. A voice emerged from outside. Calm. Confident. Dangerous. She in. Another man laughed. Boss said dead is fine. Caleb's expression hardened. The woman stirred weakly on the floor. For the first time, her eyes opened. Fear flooded them instantly. Not confusion. Not surprise. Recognition. She knew those voices. She tried to speak. Only one word emerged. Then she lost consciousness again. Outside, boots crunched through snow. Someone reached for the cabin door, and Caleb Hurst finally understood that whatever secrets lived inside that ledger were important enough to kill for. The first man through the door never saw Caleb move. A burst of wind pushed the cabin door inward. Snow swirled across the floorboards. The hunter stepped through with a revolver already drawn, expecting to find a half-frozen woman and no resistance. Instead, a heavy hand seized his wrist. The gun discharged. The shot exploded into the darkness. Wood splintered. The man's scream lasted less than a second. Caleb twisted hard. Bone cracked. The revolver hit the floor. Before the second rider could react outside, Caleb drove the first man into the doorway and sent both bodies crashing into the snow. The storm swallowed everything. For a moment there was only confusion. Then another gunshot tore through the night. Caleb dove behind a fallen pine log. The bullet ripped bark from the trunk beside his head. The second rider cursed. "Get around him," a third voice answered from somewhere near the horses. So there were 3, not 2. Caleb expected as much. Men who hunted women through mountain storms rarely travelled alone. He drew the short carbine hanging beneath his coat and waited. Snow reduced visibility to little more than shadows. That favoured him. He knew these mountains. The hunters didn't. One shape emerged through the blowing white. Caleb fired once. The figure dropped immediately. The remaining men scattered. A horse screamed. Someone shouted an order. Another voice shouted back. Then came silence. Long silence. The kind experienced trackers respected. Because silence often meant planning. Caleb counted slowly. 10 seconds. 20. 30. A branch snapped somewhere behind him. Wrong move. The hunter had circled too wide. Caleb pivoted and struck before the man realized his mistake. The fight lasted only moments. When it ended, the attacker lay unconscious in the snow. The fourth man never appeared. That worried Caleb more than the others. Smart men retreated when plans failed. Smart men reported back. Eventually hoofbeats faded into the storm. Whoever remained had decided survival mattered more than success. For tonight, Caleb stood motionless until the mountains grew quiet again. Only then did he return to the cabin. The woman remained unconscious. Her skin felt slightly warmer. Not enough. He closed the door, dragged a broken table against it, and rebuilt part of the ruined fireplace using stones scattered around the floor. An hour later, flames finally flickered to life. Heat slowly pushed back the cold. Caleb removed the woman's frozen coat and wrapped her in wool blankets from his pack. The bruises became easier to see. Some were weeks old, others newer. There was also a scar along her shoulder. Old knife wound. Not an accident either. Whoever she was, trouble had followed her for years. The ledger rested beside him. He studied it while she slept. The first pages looked ordinary. Supply purchases, construction expenses, payroll records, bridge materials, timber shipments. Nothing unusual. Then he noticed something else. Several entries had been altered. Not carelessly. Professionally. Numbers changed. Names removed. Payments duplicated. A pattern hidden beneath ordinary bookkeeping. The work was good. Very good. Good enough to fool almost anyone. Almost. Caleb remembered the bridge investigation. Official reports blamed poor weather and weak supports. Yet something had never felt right. Now he stared at page after page showing missing steel shipments, false invoices, and payments routed through shell companies. Someone had stolen a fortune, and 19 people had died covering it up. The woman stirred near dawn. Her eyes opened slowly. This time awareness remained. Fear arrived first, then confusion, then calculation. Caleb recognized the sequence immediately. She was assessing danger. Not panicking. Not crying. Thinking. Good. Thinking people survived. "Where are Mort?" she asked quietly. "My cabin S 2 miles east." She glanced around. "This is T, your cabin." "No." A faint smile touched her lips despite exhaustion. "Good." Mort was afraid Mort was losing my mind. Caleb almost smiled back. Almost. Nay. She hesitated. That told him plenty. Finally she answered. "Meg Mort know the surname." The smile vanished. Of course it did. In Black Creek, Elias Whitfield's name carried weight. Banker. Investor. Respected businessman. Generous church donor. The kind of man newspapers praised. The kind Caleb had spent years investigating. Meg slowly sat upright. Pain flashed across her face. But she pushed through it. "You should leave." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Should they Luglunk come back? Mott no. They Luglunk bring more men." Probably. Her frustration became visible. "You don't understand." "No." Mott understand perfectly. He tossed the folded federal document onto the blanket. Her eyes widened immediately, then narrowed. "Where did you get—" It fell from the ledger. For several seconds she said nothing. The fire cracked softly. Wind rattled the walls. Outside, dawn slowly painted the mountains grey. Finally she looked up. "Then you know. Mort knows someone killed 19 people." Meg stared into the flames. Her shoulders sagged. Not from weakness. From exhaustion. The kind carried for years. "Mort day nert mean to find it," she whispered. Caleb remained silent. People spoke more when they weren't interrupted. My father was an accountant before he died. He taught me bookkeeping when Mott was 10. Numbers always made sense. Numbers don't lie. She laughed bitterly. People. The statement hung in the air. Heavy. Personal. "When Elias married me," she continued, "he thought Mott was useful because Mott could organize records. He never imagined Mott'd actually read them." Caleb already suspected as much. Men like Elias rarely feared quiet women, until those women noticed things. Meg looked toward the ledger. The bridge wasn't an accident. Mott figured. It was planned. Caleb said nothing. She swallowed hard. The collapse happened exactly when it was supposed to. The cabin suddenly felt colder, even with the fire burning, because Caleb heard certainty in her voice. Not theory. Not suspicion. Knowledge. "How many people know?" he asked. Meg met his eyes. "Besides the men trying to kill me." A pause. Then she answered. "Two." Another pause. Then something changed in her expression. Fear returned. Not for herself. For something else. She reached into her coat and removed a small brass key hanging from a cord around her neck. Caleb frowned. What's that? Her fingers tightened around it. The reason they once stopped hunting me. Before she could explain further, a distant sound echoed through the mountains. Not thunder. Not wind. A rifle shot. Far away. Then another. Then another. 3 shots. Evenly spaced. Signal shots. Caleb rose immediately. His expression darkened, because signals meant coordination, and coordination meant the hunt had just become much larger. Meg watched his face. What? Caleb moved toward the window. Snow still covered the valley below, but fresh tracks were visible now. Many tracks. Too many. He counted at least 12 riders. Maybe more. Coming up the mountain. Coming directly toward them. Then he saw something that made his blood run cold. At the front of the group rode a man carrying a Federal Marshal S badge, or something that looked exactly like one. Caleb's jaw tightened, because if the hunters now controlled the law, delivering the ledger to justice had just become far more dangerous than either of them imagined. The riders were still more than a mile away when Caleb stepped back from the window. That distance meant little. On open ground, mounted men could cover a mile quickly, especially if they believed their prey was trapped. Meg watched him carefully. She had learned something important during the night. Caleb was not a man who wasted movement. Every action served a purpose. Every silence meant something. And right now he looked like a man making calculations. Not a man preparing to surrender. How long? She asked. Maybe less. She nodded once. No panic. No tears. Just acceptance. Caleb appreciated that. Fear was natural. Panic was expensive. The mountains charged heavily for panic. He moved toward the supplies stacked against one wall. Most of them had been left there seasons ago when he occasionally used the abandoned cabin as an emergency shelter during hunting trips. Flour, salt pork, dried beans, a small crate of ammunition. Nothing luxurious. Enough to survive. Not enough to fight an army. Meg slowly stood. Her legs trembled. She ignored it. The effort alone told Caleb more about her character than hours of conversation. Many people demanded rescue. Few people helped save themselves. She crossed the room and looked down at the ledger. You still haven't asked why Mort kept it. Mort figured you'd tell me when it mattered. That answer surprised her. Most men demanded explanation. Most men wanted control. Caleb wanted facts. There was a difference. A meaningful one. Outside, wind drove fresh snow against the cabin walls. Winter still ruled these mountains. The storm from the previous night had buried old tracks and reshaped entire sections of trail. That gave Caleb an idea. A dangerous one. But dangerous was becoming relative. He unfolded a weather-stained map from his pack and spread it across the table. Meg approached. For the first time, she saw evidence of the life he lived. The map was a traveller-esque map. It was a survival map. Every stream, every hidden pass, every abandoned mining trail, every ranger station, marked by hand, years of knowledge recorded in pencil. You made this, she asked. Caleb nodded. Meg studied the markings. Something unexpected happened. She immediately recognized 3 routes most people would overlook. Caleb noticed. Interesting. Can you read topographical maps? He asked. My father taught. That earned a second look. Not many women in frontier towns received that kind of education. Not many men either. Meg pointed toward a narrow valley northeast of their position. This route. Caleb said nothing. Most riders wanted to. No, the grade S too steep. Yeah, the snowpack should be unstable after yesterday's storm. Caleb stared at her. Meg finally realized why. You already knew that. Mott. A brief silence followed. Then Caleb folded the map. You understand mountains? No. Meg shook her head. Mott understand numbers. She pointed toward the route. The mountain is just another calculation. Something about that answer made Caleb smile. A real smile this time. Small. Brief. Gone almost immediately. But Meg noticed. The moment warmed her more than the fire. Not because she sought approval, because she had not seen genuine kindness in a very long time. Outside, another rifle signal echoed through the valley. Closer now. Caleb's expression hardened. The moment ended. We leave in 10 minutes. Meg glanced toward the approaching riders. Where? Federal office in Hell. She looked skeptical. That's over 100 miles. Mott. They search every road. Mott. They search every rail station. Mott. No. Meg crossed her arms. And you still think we can get... Caleb slung his rifle over one shoulder. His answer came without hesitation. Yes. The certainty in his voice was unsettling. Not arrogance. Confidence. The kind built from experience. The kind that made other people follow. Meg found herself trusting him despite knowing almost nothing about him. That realization frightened her more than she expected. Trust had nearly gotten her killed once already. Still, she followed him outside. The morning air struck like a knife. Snow reached nearly to her knees. The mountains stretched endlessly in every direction. White. Silent. Merciless. Beautiful. For a moment she understood why a man might choose to disappear here. Then Caleb handed her a pair of snowshoes. Reality returned. They began moving immediately. The first hour was brutal. Meg's body still suffered from exhaustion and exposure. Every step hurt. Every breath burned. But she refused to complain. The ledger remained secured inside a canvas satchel beneath her coat. Close to her heart. Close to the truth. Caleb led them away from obvious trails. They crossed frozen creeks, climbed steep ridges, traversed narrow slopes where a careless step could trigger an avalanche. Around noon they stopped beside a cluster of pines. Meg collapsed onto a fallen log. Caleb handed her water. Then food. She accepted both. Neither spoke for several minutes. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It simply existed, the way silence often did in wild places. Eventually, Meg opened the satchel and removed the ledger. Caleb watched. This is what they really after. She turned several pages. Columns of numbers filled the paper. Most people would see bookkeeping. Meg saw murder. These entries funded the bridge. Her finger moved downward. These entries funded explosives. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Explosives. Not construction materials. Explosives. Meg continued. The steel supports were weakened first. She flipped another page. Then replacement shipments were redirected. Another page. Then insurance policies increased. Another page. Then the bridge collapsed. The sequence was horrifyingly simple. Profits. Preparation. Death. Payment. Someone had treated human lives like numbers inside an equation. Caleb knew that mindset. He had spent years hunting men who believed wealth justified anything. What about Elias? Meg's face darkened. Wasn't he the architect? Her answer came instantly. Certain. He was the accountant. Somehow that felt worse. Not the man who gave orders. The man who made murder profitable. The man who balanced the books afterward. Caleb looked toward the distant mountains. A larger conspiracy. Exactly what he feared. Before he could ask another question, Meg pulled out a folded document hidden between pages. Unlike the federal report, this one remained intact. Caleb took it. Read. Stopped. Read again. His heartbeat slowed, then accelerated, because the paper contained a list of names. Not victims. Participants. Investors. Officials. Businessmen. Judges. Sheriffs. Bankers. Men connected to nearly every major town in the region. The conspiracy extended far beyond Black Creek, far beyond one bridge, far beyond one corrupt husband. This can be all of them, Caleb said. It isn't. Meg's voice was quiet. There were 24 names. Caleb looked up. 24. She nodded. 5 pages are missing. A cold feeling settled into his stomach. Elias removed them before Mott escaped. That changed everything. The ledger exposed part of the truth. But not enough. Someone still possessed the missing pages. Someone powerful. Someone protected. Caleb folded the document carefully. The hunt suddenly made more sense. Not because the ledger proved guilt, because it threatened to reveal the rest. And somewhere out there, powerful men were terrified. A sound interrupted his thoughts. Hoofbeats. Not distant this time. Close. Very close. Caleb immediately dropped to one knee. Rifle ready. Meg froze. The sound came again, from the opposite side of the ridge. Then a voice. Male. Young. Terrified. Caleb and Meg exchanged a look. The voice came again. Please. Somebody help me. Meg's expression changed instantly. Concern. Caleb S. did not. His eyes narrowed. The timing was wrong. The location was wrong. Everything about it felt wrong. Yet the voice sounded real. Painfully real. Then the boy screamed, and Caleb realized someone had just set a trap designed for decent people. The scream echoed across the mountains. Raw. Desperate. Human. Meg was already on her feet. Someone's hurt. Caleb didn't move. The voice came again. Closer now. Please. Help me. The panic sounded convincing. Too convincing. Years earlier, Caleb might have reacted immediately. Years earlier, he had still believed danger announced itself honestly. The mountains had taught him otherwise. So had the people who lived below them. Stay here, he said quietly. Meg stared at him. You think it is a trap? What can over keep it's a trap? Another scream drifted through the trees. This time weaker. More desperate. Meg looked torn. Every decent instinct she possessed pushed her toward the sound. Caleb noticed. That worried him almost as much as the hunters. Good people were predictable. Villains depended on it. He crouched behind a snow-covered boulder and studied the slope ahead. Nothing moved. No horses. No riders. No smoke. No sign of life. Only pine trees and drifting snow. Exactly the kind of place someone would choose for an ambush. The scream came again. Different direction. Not by much. But enough. Caleb's eyes narrowed. There. The mistake. The caller wasn't moving. The sound was. A faint gust carried it across the ridge. Someone was using the mountainous echoes, projecting a voice through the valleys. A hunting trick. An old one. The realization settled coldly into his mind. Whoever led the pursuit knew wilderness tactics. Not merely hired killers. Professionals. Meg slowly understood from Caleb's expression. What is it? The boy does exist. The words landed heavily. She listened, waited. Another cry floated through the pines. Now she heard it too. The unnatural repetition, the spacing, the identical tone, like lines repeated from memory, not genuine panic. Performance. A moment later a rifle shot cracked somewhere below. Then another. Then silence. The trap had failed. Someone knew it. Caleb stood immediately. We moved. They left the ridge without another word. For the next several hours they climbed deeper into the bitter roots. The route grew increasingly dangerous. Narrow ledges, ice-covered slopes, hidden crevasses buried beneath snow. Twice Meg nearly lost her footing. Twice Caleb caught her arm before she fell. Neither mentioned it afterward. The mountain didn't care about pride. Only survival. By late afternoon dark clouds gathered overhead again. Another storm. Meg saw it immediately. You expected this. Caleb glanced toward the western horizon. Storm S moving faster than... She blinked. Forecast. He pointed toward the sky. Most people saw clouds. Caleb saw information. Wind direction. Moisture. Temperature shifts. Pressure changes. Years of observation translated into instinct. The clouds are wrong. Meg followed his gaze. At first she saw nothing unusual. Then slowly she noticed. The lower layer moved east. The upper layer moved south. Conflicting currents. Unstable weather. A serious storm. You learned all that from... The answer sounded absurd. Yet she believed him. Because every mile travelled proved he understood these mountains better than anyone she had ever met. As evening approached, they reached a narrow valley hidden between steep cliffs. A small cabin stood near a frozen stream. Unlike the Trapper-S shelter, this one remained intact. Weathered. Remote. Invisible from most trails. Meg looked at Caleb. You own this? Then who? For the first time uncertainty crossed his face. That alone made her nervous. It belonged to someone Mott knew. Belonged. Past tense. Something painful lingered beneath those words. Caleb opened the door. Dust greeted them. The cabin had not been used recently. Yet supplies remained. Firewood. Blankets. Tools. A cast-iron stove. Meg immediately noticed the organization. Everything arranged carefully. Everything maintained. Someone had once cared deeply about this place. She set down the ledger. Caleb began building a fire. The familiar routine relaxed him slightly. Wood. Kindling. Spark. Flame. Simple things made sense. People often didn't. An hour later warmth filled the cabin. Outside, snow began falling again. Inside, silence settled comfortably. Meg used the opportunity to examine her injuries. The bruises across her ribs remained ugly. One shoulder ached constantly. Her left wrist still carried marks from where Elias had grabbed her days earlier. Caleb noticed. He said nothing, but she saw the muscle tighten in his jaw. That reaction surprised her. Not because of anger, because he wasn't asking questions. Most people demanded explanations before offering sympathy. Caleb offered neither, only respect. Eventually he reached into a cabinet and removed a small wooden box. Medical supplies. Bandages. Needles. Alcohol. Meg raised an eyebrow. You keep enough supplies for... Caleb sat beside the stove. For a long moment he stared into the fire. Then he answered. My wife was. The room became very quiet. Meg immediately regretted asking. Yet Caleb continued. Perhaps because the storm outside isolated them from the world. Perhaps because exhaustion weakened old defenses, or perhaps because carrying grief alone eventually becomes too heavy. Her name was... Meg remained silent, listening. Anna. The name sounded cherished, painful, loved. She worked for mountain communities, treated injuries, delivered babies, set broken bones. A faint smile appeared, gone almost instantly. People trust. The past tense returned. Meg understood. She didn't interrupt. 5 years ago, Caleb said quietly, an epidemic swept through the valley. The fire popped softly. Outside, wind shook the walls. She stayed. Meg closed her eyes. She already knew the ending, because some people always stayed, and those people often paid the highest price. Others survived because of... Caleb stared into the flames. She didn't. The cabin fell silent again. Not awkward silence. Shared silence. The kind created when truth enters a room. Meg finally spoke. Mort Metz. Caleb nodded once. Nothing more. Nothing needed. Several minutes passed. Then Meg surprised herself. Maybe because grief recognizes grief. Maybe because loneliness does. My father died because he trusted the wrong men. Caleb looked up. She continued. He found discrepancies in company records years before the bridge collapsed. The connection struck immediately. He knew some... Meg nodded. Not everything, but enough. The ledger sat on the table between them, heavy with secrets, heavy with consequences. My father planned to report. Her voice softened. He never got the chance. Caleb understood. No further explanation necessary. The conspiracy had claimed more victims than 19. Many more. Some simply weren't accounted. Outside, darkness deepened. The storm intensified. For the first time since escaping Black Creek, Meg felt relatively safe. That feeling lasted less than 10 minutes. A sudden knock echoed against the cabin door. Both froze. One knock. Then another. Slow. Measured. Impossible. Nobody should have known they were here. Nobody. Caleb quietly reached for his rifle. Meg's pulse accelerated. The knock came again. Then a voice. Older. Male. Calm. What know you inside? Caleb. The blood drained from Caleb's face. Meg had never seen fear touch him before. Now she did. Only for a second. But it was there. Real. Deep. Personal. The voice continued. You haven't seen me in years. A pause. Then words that made Caleb's expression harden instantly. But Mott believe you recarrying something that belongs to us. The voice outside belonged to a man Caleb hoped never to hear again. For several seconds he remained completely still. Not from fear. From recognition. There were only a handful of people alive who knew about this cabin. Fewer still who could have tracked him through a storm. And only one who would announce himself instead of kicking down the door. Meg saw something change behind Caleb's eyes. Not panic. Memory. Bad memory. The kind that never truly leaves. Who is it? She whispered. Caleb never looked away from the door. A man Mort used to trust. The knock came again. Slow. Patient. As though the visitor had all night. You getting old. Caleb, the voice called. You always answered quicker than this. The words carried familiarity. Even humour, which somehow made them more dangerous. Caleb stepped toward the window and carefully shifted the curtain. One rider. No visible companions. A grey horse. Dark overcoat. Wide-brimmed hat. The figure sat comfortably despite the storm. Like a man visiting an old friend, Caleb S. jaw tightened. Marshal Everett Kane. Meg S. breath caught. She recognized the name immediately. Everyone in 3 territories knew it. Federal Marshal, decorated investigator, public hero, newspaper favorite. The kind of man towns trusted instinctively. The kind of man judges listened to. The kind of man criminals feared. Or claimed to. He's part of this, she asked. Caleb didn't answer immediately. Because he was certain. Not yet. And uncertainty was dangerous. Especially where Everett Kane was concerned. 5 years earlier, Kane had been one of the few men Caleb respected. 3 years earlier, they had worked together. 2 years earlier, Kane had testified against corruption in federal offices. 1 year later, the bridge investigation disappeared, and so had Kane. Officially transferred. Officially promoted. Officially untouchable. Now he stood outside a hidden cabin nobody should have known existed. That fact spoke loudly. The marshal called again. She told you about the ledger. Didn't she? Meg froze. Caleb noticed. So did Kane, because the older man laughed softly. Motlugluunk take that as a yes. The sound unsettled Caleb. Everett wasn't bluffing. He knew enough already, which meant something had gone wrong long before Meg fled Black Creek. Caleb made a decision. A careful one. Stay behind me. Meg opened her mouth to protest, then stopped. The tone in his voice told her the matter wasn't open for debate. Caleb opened the door. Cold air rushed inside. Snow swirled through the gap. Marshal Kane remained mounted 20 yards away, exactly outside rifle range. Another detail Caleb noticed immediately. The older man removed his hat. Grey hair, weathered face, sharp eyes, older than before, not weaker. If anything, more dangerous. The years had polished him, like a knife. "Good evening," Kane said. Nobody returned the greeting. The marshal smiled. "Mot suppose we re beyond pleasantries? Depends. On Caleb rested one hand on his rifle. Whether you re-hunting us?" The marshal studied him. For a long moment neither man spoke. Snow drifted between them. The mountains listened. Then Kane sighed. That S disappointing. Answer the question. Mot just. Caleb's eyes narrowed. The response sounded truthful. That bothered him, because Kane had always been skilled at telling partial truths. The marshal glanced past him, toward the cabin interior, toward Meg. His gaze lingered only briefly. Not like a predator, like an investigator, evaluating, calculating. Then he looked back at Caleb. "May Mort come inside?" "No." Kane chuckled. Still stuck, still alive. Fair point. For the first time the Marshal S expression became serious. The humour vanished. "Listen carefully. Caleb." The change in tone immediately commanded attention. "This situation is larger than you think." Meg almost laughed bitterly. Everyone kept saying that, and everyone kept proving it true. The bridge wasn't the beginning, Kane continued. It was the... Caleb remained silent. Kane nodded slowly, as if expecting exactly that reaction. 3 bridges. Meg's eyes widened. 3? The marshal looked toward her. 3 separate collapses across 2 territories over 8 years. The words struck like a hammer. For a moment nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 3 bridges. Not 1. 3. 19 victims suddenly became part of something far larger. Kane continued. The first collapse killed 11. The second killed 19. The third killed 7. Meg felt sick. 37 deaths. At least. Perhaps more. And all connected. The Marshal S. face darkened. Every investigation disappeared. Caleb finally spoke. Because someone buried... Yes. Who? The older man smiled without humour. If Mott knew that, we wouldn't be standing in a snowstorm. A fair answer. Too fair. Which made Caleb even more suspicious. Kane removed a folded paper from his coat, then tossed it into the snow halfway between them. Read. Nobody moved initially. Finally, Caleb stepped forward and retrieved it. The document bore federal markings. Authentic. Not forged. His eyes scanned the contents, then scanned them again. Because the information was difficult to believe. 3 federal agents dead. 2 witnesses missing. 1 judge murdered. All within the past 6 months. Every person connected to reopened bridge inquiries. The implications were horrifying. Someone was merely covering up old crimes. Someone was actively eliminating threats. Systematically. Professionally. Meg watched Caleb's expression. That alone told her enough. The paper was real. Very real. Kane spoke quietly. The men hunting you aren't independent contractors. His gaze shifted toward her. They re-employees. Meg felt her stomach tighten. Employees of who? The Marshal hesitated. For the first time. A tiny hesitation. But Caleb noticed. So did Meg. And that hesitation answered the question. Kane didn't know. Or couldn't prove it. Either possibility was terrifying. The wrong people have influence everywhere, he said finally. Banks. Courts. Rail companies. State officers. He paused, then delivered the sentence neither of them expected. And Mott thinks somebody inside Washington is protecting. Silence followed. Heavy silence. The kind created when reality becomes larger than imagination. A federal conspiracy. Not proven. Not yet. But suddenly possible. Painfully possible. The Marshal looked toward the cabin. Toward the ledger. Toward the hidden truth everyone seemed willing to kill for. You need to understand something. His voice grew softer. More personal. Once those men realize Caleb Hurst is involved, this stops being a search. Meg frowned. What does that mean? Kane's eyes never left Caleb. It means they stop trying to recover evidence. A pause. Then the answer. They'll start trying to eliminate witnesses. Cold swept through Meg despite the fire behind her. Because she finally understood. The hunters weren't chasing a woman anymore. They were chasing 2 people. And one of them happened to be a former federal investigator who already knew too much. The Marshal adjusted his gloves. Then mounted his horse fully. Mott Canty stepped. Caleb stepped forward. Why not? Kane looked toward the darkness beyond the trees. The expression on his face changed. Only briefly. Concern. Real concern. Then it vanished. Because somewhere in the forest a branch cracked. Not naturally. Someone moving. The Marshal heard it too. His eyes sharpened instantly. Caleb turned. Rifle rising. The forest remained still. Silent. Empty. Yet every instinct he possessed suddenly screamed the same warning. They were no longer alone. Kane backed his horse away from the cabin. Fast. Purposeful. Leave immediate. The urgency shocked both of them. Why? Meg demanded. The Marshal-S answer came without hesitation. Because if they here already, a rifle fired from the darkness. The bullet struck Kane squarely in the chest. The impact threw Everett Kane backward in the saddle. For one impossible second he remained upright. Then gravity won. The Marshal crashed into the snow. His horse bolted into the storm. Everything happened at once. Meg screamed. Caleb fired toward the muzzle flash. The rifle report echoed through the valley. A second shot answered immediately. Wood exploded from the cabin wall inches from Meg's head. "Inside," Caleb shouted. She didn't argue. They dove through the doorway together. Another bullet tore through the open entrance before Caleb slammed the door shut. The cabin shook. Silence lasted only a moment. Then gunfire erupted from 3 different directions. Not random shooting. Coordinated fire. Professionals. Caleb crouched beside the window. Counted. 1 shooter northeast. 1 west. 1 directly below the ridge. At least 3. Possibly more. Outside, Kane lay motionless in the snow. Meg's face had gone pale. They killed him. Caleb reloaded calmly. If they wanted certainty, they'd shoot him again. She stared. The statement sounded cold. Then she understood. He wasn't being heartless. He was analyzing, because something about the attack made no sense. If the shooters wanted Kane dead, why fire once? Why not finish the job? Another bullet smashed through a shutter. The answer arrived immediately. They weren't targeting Kane. They were targeting the cabin. The marshal had simply been standing in the wrong place, or perhaps exactly where they expected him to be. Caleb's expression darkened. That possibility was worse. Much worse. A voice echoed from outside. "Bring us the lead." Meg froze. The voice continued. "Walk out alone and nobody else gets hurt." Caleb rolled his eyes. That S knew. Meg almost laughed despite the danger. Almost. The voice came again, more impatient this time. "You have 1 minute." Then silence returned, the kind that usually preceded violence. Meg looked toward the door, then toward the ledger, then toward Caleb. "They won T. No. If I surrender." No. The word arrived instantly. Firm. Absolute. Meg frowned. "You didn't even let me finish. Not know how it ends." The simplicity of the response stunned her. Because he did know. Anyone with experience knew. People willing to murder for secrets rarely left witnesses alive. Caleb moved to another window, studied the terrain, calculated angles, escape routes, risks. A plan slowly formed. Not a good plan. The good plans had disappeared several days ago. Now only surviving plans remained. Meg watched him work. Watched the quiet efficiency. The discipline. The refusal to panic. A strange realization settled over her. Caleb wasn't brave because he lacked fear. He was brave because fear never controlled him. That distinction mattered. Outside, wind intensified. Snow hammered the cabin roof. Visibility dropped further. A blessing. And a curse. Meg glanced toward Kane's fallen body. Something bothered her. Something small. Then she saw it. Movement. Tiny movement. The Marshal S hand. Her eyes widened. Kane. He didn't look away from the window. What? Kane moved. That got his attention. Immediately. He crossed the room and peered through a narrow gap in the shutter. For several seconds he said nothing. "You rewrite." Relief flashed through Meg, followed quickly by another emotion. Confusion. Because Kane was deep-crawling toward safety. He wasn't seeking cover. He was reaching toward his coat. Slowly. Painfully. As though searching for something. "What is he doing?" she whispered. Caleb watched. The Marshal's hand finally disappeared inside his jacket, then emerged holding a small metal object. Not a weapon. A mirror. Caleb blinked. Once. Twice. Then understanding hit. The mirror flashed briefly. One signal. Pause. Two signals. Pause. One signal. Meg frowned. What does that... Caleb's face hardened. Military recognition code. The answer raised even more questions. Recognition for who? The shooters? An ally? Someone hidden nearby? Kane completed the signal. Then his arm collapsed into the snow. Motionless again. The storm swallowed him. Meg's pulse quickened. Nothing about this situation made sense anymore. A federal marshal who knew too much. Assassins in the mountains. A conspiracy spanning years. And now coded signals. The cabin suddenly felt very small. Very fragile. A loud crack interrupted her thoughts. Not gunfire. Something else. Caleb's eyes snapped toward the ceiling. Another crack followed. Longer. Deeper. The sound came from above them. Outside. On the mountain. His expression changed instantly. Meg had never seen alarm cross his face before. Now she did. What? Caleb didn't answer immediately. Because he was listening. The storm. The wind. The slope above the valley. Then the third crack arrived. The longest yet. And he knew. Avalanche. The realization hit like lightning. The gunfire. The repeated shots. The unstable snowpack. The route this morning. Everything connected instantly. The attackers hadn't merely come to shoot them. They had come to bring the mountain down on top of them. Caleb grabbed his rifle. Meg didn't hesitate. The urgency in his voice erased every question. What about Ken? We take him. The answer surprised her. Even now. Even wounded. Even suspicious. Caleb was to leaving a man behind. Outside. Another sound rolled across the valley. Low. Deep. Growing. Like distant thunder. Except thunder didn't continue. This did. The mountain was waking up. And once an avalanche started, nobody negotiated with it. Nobody outran it for long. Caleb threw open the door. Snow blasted inside. The roar grew louder instantly. Much louder. Meg looked toward the upper slopes. Her blood turned to ice. An entire section of mountainside had broken loose. Thousands of tons of snow were racing toward the valley. Toward the cabin. Toward Kane. Toward all of them. And hidden somewhere behind that wall of white. The hunters were coming too. The avalanche sounded like the end of the world. A deep, rolling roar thundered through the valley as an entire mountainside collapsed. Trees snapped. Rock shattered. Snow exploded downward in a white wall hundreds of feet wide. For a moment Meg couldn't move. The sheer scale overwhelmed every instinct. The mountain itself was falling. Caleb grabbed her arm. That single word broke the paralysis. They ran. Not away from the avalanche. Nobody outran an avalanche. They ran sideways. Toward a rocky outcrop rising above the valley floor. The only terrain that offered any chance at survival. Behind them, Kane remained motionless in the snow. Caleb changed direction instantly. Meg understood before he spoke. They were getting him. The marshal had perhaps 30 seconds left. Maybe less. Caleb reached him first. Blood stained the front of Kane's coat. But not enough blood. The realization struck immediately. The bullet hadn't penetrated deeply. A glancing hit. Or body armor. Kane's eyes opened. Barely. About time, he muttered. Caleb almost laughed. Even now the man refused to sound afraid. Can you stand? No. Wonderful. The marshal winced. You still unpleasant. The avalanche roared louder. Much louder. The ground vibrated beneath their boots. Conversation ended. Caleb hauled Kane over one shoulder. Meg grabbed the marshal's satchel. Together they sprinted toward the rock formation. Snow erupted through the valley behind them. The first wave struck abandoned pines. Entire trees vanished. Consumed instantly. The sound became deafening. A living wall of destruction. 50 yards. 40. 30. The outcrop loomed ahead. A narrow depression existed behind it. Not ideal. Not safe. Possible. That would have to be enough. Down, Caleb shouted. The three of them dove behind the stone ridge. A fraction of a second later the avalanche arrived. The impact felt like being struck by a freight train. Snow slammed into the rocks. Air exploded from Meg's lungs. The world vanished. White. Pressure. Noise. Cold. For endless seconds the mountain tried to bury them alive. Then gradually the violence passed. The roar faded. The movement slowed. Silence returned. Heavy. Absolute. Meg coughed. Then coughed again. Her ears rang. Every muscle ached. Slowly she pushed herself upright. The valley was gone. Simply gone. The cabin. The stream. The trees. Everything buried beneath mountains of fresh snow. Only the upper portion of the rock outcrop remained visible. Nothing else. For several seconds nobody spoke. Because there was nothing to say. The avalanche had erased the landscape. Then Kane began laughing. Weakly. Painfully. But laughing. Meg stared. The marshal shook his head. Mort spent 20 years surviving criminals. A cough interrupted him. Never thought a mountain would come closer. Caleb helped him sit upright. The wound across Kane's chest looked ugly but manageable. The bullet had struck a metal plate hidden beneath his coat. Not military armor. Something improvised. Something worn by a man expecting trouble. You knew they'd shoot. Kane glanced up. At Meg. At Caleb. Then nodded. Mort suspected. That's why you stayed outside. Caleb's eyes narrowed. What's the other? The marshal hesitated. Not long. Just enough. Then he reached into his coat. Meg instinctively stiffened. Kane noticed. Relax. He produced a folded packet sealed in oilcloth. Not a weapon. Documents. He handed them directly to Caleb. Open it. Caleb did. The first page immediately captured his attention. Federal correspondence. Confidential. The second page. Financial records. The third. Witness statements. Then his expression changed. The fourth page contained a name. One name. A name he recognized instantly. A name that explained far too much. Judge Franklin Voss. Meg frowned. Who's that? Neither man answered immediately. Kane finally spoke. The bridge case. Meg remembered. The name appeared several times inside the ledger. Minor references. Nothing significant. Or so she thought. The judge was in. Kane nodded. Were. He pointed toward another page. Caleb turned it. Read. Stopped. Read again. Because the information was astonishing. Judge Voss hadn't merely protected the conspiracy. He had helped create it. Years earlier he had organized a network allowing wealthy investors to hide illegal profits through infrastructure projects. Bridges. Rail lines. Road contracts. Government construction. Every project created opportunities. opportunities for theft, fraud, and eventually murder. Meg felt sick. The conspiracy was larger than she imagined. Far larger. Then she noticed something. One name appeared repeatedly, more often than any other. A name she knew intimately. Elias Whitfield. Her husband. Her hands began trembling. Not from fear. Rage. Pure rage. Page after page connected Elias to transactions, shell accounts, secret payments, and falsified records. He wasn't merely the accountant. He wasn't merely helping. He was central, essential, one of the architects. The realization shattered the final illusion she had carried. Some part of her had still hoped there was another explanation, a misunderstanding, a hidden truth. Something. Now there was nothing. Only evidence. Cold. Precise. Merciless. Cain watched her carefully. Mott Metz. Meg laughed bitterly. She closed the file. No urine. The marshal accepted the criticism. Because she was right. Nobody felt sorry for Elias. Not anymore. The storm continued overhead. Snow drifted through the shattered valley. The avalanche had unintentionally provided them something valuable. Time. The hunters would need hours to navigate the destruction. Perhaps longer. For the first time in days they weren't being actively chased. That realization should have felt comforting. Instead it created new questions. Caleb studied the documents again. One detail bothered him. Deeply. He turned another page. Then another. Then looked directly at Cain. Something missing. The marshal sighed. Mott no. Caleb tapped the paperwork. This network operated for nearly a decade. Yes. These men answered to someone. Cain's expression darkened. Exactly. That was the problem. The judge was powerful, but not powerful enough. Someone else existed above him. Someone financing everything. Someone untouchable. The true architect. Meg suddenly remembered the missing ledger pages. 5 pages. 5 missing pages. Her eyes widened. The name. Both men looked toward her. The missing pages. She stood, ignoring exhaustion, ignoring pain, thinking, calculating, connecting. The names Elias removed. Caleb immediately understood. The lead. Meg nodded, excitement and dread colliding together. The missing pages probably identify whoever controls the entire operation. Silence followed, because the conclusion felt correct, dangerously correct. And if it was true, everything changed. The hunters weren't pursuing a ledger. Not really. They were pursuing 5 missing pages. Pages nobody had seen. Pages that could destroy powerful men. Pages currently missing. Hidden. Unknown. Cain looked directly at Meg. For the first time since arriving, genuine urgency entered his voice. Tell me exactly what happened the night you escaped. Meg froze, because suddenly she understood something she had overlooked. Something impossible. Something terrifying. The last person who had seen those missing pages was Elias Whitfield. It was her. For several seconds nobody spoke. The wind drifted across the avalanche field. Snow hissed softly through broken branches. And Meg stood frozen, because a memory had just returned. Not completely. Not clearly. But enough. The night she escaped. The night everything changed. The night Elias stopped pretending. Mott thought he burned. Her voice sounded distant, almost as though someone else had spoken. Cain leaned forward despite the pain in his chest. What exactly happened? Meg closed her eyes, forced herself backward through memory, back to Black Creek, back to the study, back to the ledger, back to the fear. It was after midnight. The words emerged slowly, carefully. Elias thought Mott was asleep. The marshal nodded. Go. Mott heard voices downstairs. A flash of memory. Men gathered around a table. Whiskey glasses. Documents. Arguments. Anger. Meg remembered hiding near the staircase. Listening. Watching. Learning things she was never supposed to hear. Mott heard them discussing the investigation. Another memory surfaced. One of the men had been terrified. Not angry. Terrified. A man who believed disaster was coming. He wanted out. Kane frowned. Mott Dante no. Her frustration showed. He kept saying they should disappear before everything collapsed. Caleb exchanged a glance with the marshal. Interesting. Very interesting. Because criminal organizations rarely feared exposure, unless exposure was already underway. Meg continued. Elias disagreed. That part she remembered clearly. Painfully clearly. Her husband S. face. Calm. Cold. Certain. The face of a man who believed himself protected. He said nobody could touch. The words hung heavily. Nobody could touch them. Not because they were innocent. Because they were powerful. A crucial distinction. Meg opened her eyes. Another fragment returned. A stronger fragment. One she had forgotten entirely. There was a... Kane immediately focused. What kind of... Mott Dante? She shook her head. Large. Folded. Several men were studying it. Caleb's attention sharpened. Maps mattered, especially to people moving money, or hiding secrets. Anything unusual. Meg hesitated, then nodded. Red marking. The marshal frowned. Location. Not certainty. Possibility. Still valuable. Very valuable. Meg rubbed her temples. The effort hurt. The memories were returning too quickly now. A dangerous flood. Mort remember Elias opening a safe. Both men looked up instantly. Yes. The image became clearer. The hidden compartment behind a bookshelf. The iron door. The combination lock. The papers. The missing pages. Everything. He removed 5 pages from the ledger. Her breathing quickened. He was angry. Kane listened carefully. What happened next? Meg swallowed. Then remembered. Fully. The realization struck like lightning. He didn't keep... Silence. Complete silence. Even the wind seemed to stop. Caleb spoke first. What? Meg looked directly at him. He didn't keep the pages. Every word felt certain now. Solid. True. He gave them to someone. The implication landed heavily. Because it explained everything. The pages weren't hidden inside Elias Whitfield S. office. They weren't buried. They weren't destroyed. They had been transferred. Delivered. Protected. Moved higher up the chain. Kane slowly exhaled. Damn. Exactly. Damn. Because retrieving evidence from Elias was difficult. Retrieving evidence from whoever controlled Elias might be impossible. Meg sat heavily on a fallen log protruding from the avalanche debris. Exhaustion returned suddenly. The emotional weight finally catching up. For days she had believed the missing pages remained in Black Creek. Now that hope was gone. The real enemy remained hidden. Protected. Untouched. And probably aware they were being hunted. Caleb studied the valley. Thinking. Calculating. looking for connections. One question bothered him. One question more important than all the others. Why was Meg still alive? The conspiracy had murdered witnesses, federal agents, judges, investigators, entire groups of innocent people. So why leave Meg alive long enough to escape? The answer arrived gradually. And when it did, he didn't like it. Not at all. Because perhaps they hadn't meant to leave her alive. Perhaps they believed she knew something she herself didn't realize. He looked toward Kane. The Marshal S expression suggested he had reached the same conclusion. Neither man liked it. Meg noticed. Caleb crouched beside her. When Elias realized you'd found the ledger, she nodded. He panicked. Yes, when he sent men after you. Yes, Caleb's eyes narrowed. Did he ever ask what you remembered? Meg blinked. The question seemed strange. Then she thought. Really thought. And suddenly her face drained of colour. Because he had. Repeatedly. Not about the ledger. Not about the accounts. Not about the documents. Only one thing. The meeting. The conversation. The safe. The pages. What she remembered seeing. What she remembered hearing. The realization hit hard. Elias wasn't chasing her because of the ledger. Not originally. He was chasing her because he believed she knew where the missing pages went. And perhaps she did, without realizing it. A cold feeling settled into her stomach, because memory worked strangely, especially under trauma. People forgot details, then remembered them months later, years later, at inconvenient moments, dangerous moments. Like now, a sudden sound interrupted the thought. Kane's head snapped toward the eastern ridge. Caleb reacted immediately. Hand on rifle. Listening. The noise came again. Faint. Distant. Metal striking stone. Once. Twice. 3 times. Not natural. Not accidental. A signal. Someone communicating. The Marshal cursed softly. What? Kane rose painfully to his feet. His face had become grim. Very grim. Motkanovi kept that signal. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Who used it? The older man looked toward the storm-dark ridge, then gave an answer neither of them expected. Federal reconnaissance teams. Meg frowned. Kane nodded. A pause. Then, except no federal team should be anywhere near this mountain. Silence followed. Because everyone understood what that meant. Someone else had arrived. Someone organized. Someone trained. Someone carrying federal signals. And if Kane was correct, the conspiracy had just become far more dangerous than they imagined. Then another metallic signal echoed through the mountains. Closer this time. Much closer. And this time it was followed by something even worse. A voice. Amplified by the valley. Calm. Confident. And familiar. Meg felt every drop of blood leave her face, because she recognized it instantly. Elias Whitfield. Her husband. And he sounded absolutely certain he was about to win. Elias Whitfield's voice drifted through the mountains like poison. Calm. Controlled. Confident. The voice of a man who believed the outcome had already been decided. Meg felt her stomach twist. For days she had imagined this moment. Imagined confronting him. Imagined exposing him. Imagined watching the mask finally crack. Yet hearing his voice again awakened something older than anger. Fear. Not fear of what he might do. Fear of what he had already done. The Avalanche Valley amplified every word. He rarely used her full name. Only when performing. Only when he wanted an audience. You read. The voice echoed from somewhere beyond the eastern ridge. Impossible to locate precisely. Deliberately impossible. You've suffered. Kane rolled his eyes. Still a theatrical bastard. Caleb remained focused on the terrain. The avalanche had changed everything. Natural landmarks were gone. Old routes erased. Sound behaved differently now. Elias understood that, which meant he was receiving guidance from someone familiar with mountain operations. Another troubling detail. Meg stepped forward. "Stay back," Caleb warned. She ignored him. Not recklessly. Deliberately. There was a difference. Elias. The name left her mouth like a challenge. The mountain carried it away. Silence followed. Then laughter. Soft laughter. The sound made her skin crawl. The familiarity disgusted her, as though he still believed they shared something, as though years of manipulation and violence could be erased through tone alone. "You've caused quite a disturbance." Meg's eyes hardened. 37 people are dead. The laughter vanished. Immediately. Interesting. The accusation had landed. "Good. Careful," Elias replied. "You don't understand everything." "No." Meg stared toward the ridge. "But not understand enough." A pause. Longer this time. Then his voice returned. Colder. "You found documents." Not a question. A statement. He knew. Or suspected. The distinction no longer mattered. Meg exchanged a brief glance with Caleb. He nodded almost imperceptibly. Let him talk. Let him reveal things. The old investigator in Caleb recognized opportunity. People who felt powerful often became careless, especially when they believed victory was close. Meg drew a slow breath. What happened to the missing pages? Silence. So that's what this is about. The answer itself revealed nothing. The reaction revealed everything. Elias cared about those pages. Desperately. Kane noticed too. His expression sharpened. Meg pressed harder. "Who did you give them?" The silence that followed lasted nearly 15 seconds. An eternity in conversation. Then Elias laughed again. But differently this time. Not confidently. Nervously. Tiny cracks. Barely visible. Yet present. And once cracks appeared, they tended to spread. You always were clear. There it was. Avoidance. Not denial. Avoidance. Meg felt hope flicker. Small. Dangerous. Real. Because innocent people denied accusations. Guilty people redirected them. The voice continued. Your father would have been proud. The words hit harder than expected. Meg froze. For a moment the mountains disappeared. The storm disappeared. The conspiracy disappeared. Only her father remained. His quiet smile. Ink-stained fingers. Patient lessons. Long evenings spent teaching her bookkeeping while others insisted such things were wasted on girls. Rage followed immediately. Pure rage. You killed. The valley went silent. Not even the wind seemed willing to interrupt. Then Elias answered. The response came instantly. Too instantly. Prepared. Rehearsed. A lie he had told himself many times. Meg heard it. Caleb heard it. Kane definitely heard it. And from Kane's expression, he recognized something else. Guilt. Not innocence. Not grief. Guilt. The kind hidden beneath technical truths. Perhaps Elias hadn't physically killed her father. Perhaps someone else had. The distinction no longer mattered. He had participated, enabled, benefited. The moral difference was non-existent. A faint movement caught Caleb's eye. Far beyond the ridge, through drifting snow. A glint. Metal. Then another. Then another. His pulse slowed. Observation mode. 3 men. Maybe 4. Moving carefully. Using Elias as a distraction. Exactly as expected. The conversation wasn't negotiation. It was positioning. The hunters were closing in. Caleb leaned slightly toward Kane. 3:00. The marshal glanced casually. Saw them immediately. 4. Caleb nodded. He'd have missed one. Good catch. Meg continued speaking, buying time without realizing it. Perhaps that was for the best. What are you afraid? The question surprised everyone. Even Elias. His hesitation confirmed it. Meg stepped forward again, voice stronger now. You have judged. No response. You have bang. Silence. You have federal contact. Nothing. Her eyes narrowed. Yet you read terrified of 5 missing pages. That one landed. Hard. The reaction was immediate. Not visible. Audible. A sharp intake of breath. Tiny. Almost imperceptible. But there, Kane smiled grimly. God, yes. She had. For the first time, Meg understood something profound. Elias wasn't hunting her because he was powerful. He was hunting her because he was afraid. Afraid she knew something. Afraid she remembered something. Afraid she might expose whoever stood above him. The realization transformed him. In an instant he became smaller. Not physically. Psychologically. The illusion shattered. The untouchable businessman vanished. What remained was a frightened conspirator trying desperately to survive. Then a memory struck Meg. Sudden. Violent. Complete. Her knees nearly buckled. The safe. The meeting. The pages. The map. The red markings. Not locations. Not routes. Deposits. Bank deposits. Her eyes widened. The memory continued. One of the missing pages had fallen. Briefly. Only briefly. But she had seen it. Long enough. Just long enough. A series of account numbers. Names. Transfer records. And one name circled in red ink. Not Elias. Not Judge Voss. Someone else. Someone higher. Much higher. The memory arrived fully, and with it came understanding. Oh God, Caleb turned instantly. Meg looked at him. Terrified. Not because she remembered. Because of who she remembered. The name felt impossible. Absurd. Catastrophic. Kane saw her face, and whatever he saw made his expression darken. Meg opened her mouth. A rifle fired. The bullet struck the snow between them, close enough to spray ice across their faces. The hunters had finished positioning. Conversation time was over. Another shot followed. Then another. And suddenly figures emerged through the storm from 3 different directions. Not 4 men. Not 6. At least 12. Well armed. Disciplined. Closing fast. Caleb raised his rifle. Kane drew a revolver. Meg clutched the satchel containing the ledger. But none of them could stop staring at her, because whatever name had just returned to her memory was important enough to terrify even her. And somewhere beyond the snow, Elias Whitfield had realized she finally remembered it too. The first bullet had been a warning. The second was in T. Snow exploded from a boulder beside Kane's head. The marshal dropped instantly behind cover. The command echoed across the shattered valley. The hunters advanced with frightening discipline. No shouting. No reckless charges. No wasted ammunition. They moved like men who had trained together for years. Which meant they probably had. Caleb counted quickly. 12 visible. Possibly more hidden by the storm. Too many. Far too many. The avalanche field offered almost no protection. The cabin was gone. The trees were gone. The terrain favoured the attackers, and whoever commanded them understood exactly what they were doing. Another rifle cracked. A hunter screamed. Caleb's shot had found its mark. The advancing line hesitated briefly. Only briefly. Then continued forward. Professionals. Definitely professionals. Meg crouched behind a buried log. Her heart hammered. The ledger sat inside the satchel beneath her coat. Heavy. Important. Worth killing for. But suddenly another thought dominated everything else. The name. The name she had remembered. The name from the missing page. The name circled in red ink. It echoed inside her mind. Impossible. Absurd. Terrifying. She still struggled to believe it. Kane slid beside her. Blood stained his coat. His breathing had grown more laboured, yet his eyes remained sharp. Focused. Alive. What did you remember? Meg looked toward him. Snow collected on her hair. On her shoulders. On the satchel. The Marshal S voice lowered. Tell me. Another shot cracked overhead. Caleb fired again. A second hunter fell. The line spread wider. Trying to flank. Trying to surround. Time was running out. Meg leaned toward Kane. Then whispered the name. The Marshal froze. Completely froze. His expression changed instantly. Shock. Real shock. Not the kind people perform. The genuine kind. The dangerous kind. Oh no. 3 simple words. Nothing more. But they confirmed everything. Meg felt sick. Because Kane believed her. Not questioned. Not doubted. Believed. The Marshal closed his eyes briefly. Then opened them again. Older somehow. Warier. The son of another bullet struck nearby. Neither reacted. The revelation had momentarily eclipsed the gunfire. Caleb noticed. And that worried him. Greatly. Because men like Kane did not shock easily. He retreated behind the log. Reloaded. Looked between them. Kane hesitated. Not because he doubted Caleb, because saying the name aloud changed everything. Once spoken, there would be no going back. No pretending. No uncertainty. Only war. Finally the Marshal spoke. And when he did, his voice sounded unlike anything Meg had heard before. Not fear. Something worse. Recognition. The missing pages identify the financial controller. Caleb frowned. We already knew. Kane shook his head. You don't understand. Another rifle shot echoed across the valley. The hunters kept coming. 30 yards closer now. 25. Closing steadily. Kane ignored them. For the moment. Because the truth mattered more. The financial controller is Diabanca. A pause. Or another pause. Or a business. Caleb's eyes narrowed. The Marshal looked directly at him. Then finally said the name. For several seconds Caleb didn't react. Because his mind rejected it. Instinctively, automatically, the name was too large, too powerful, too protected. Then realization struck. Hard. His expression darkened immediately. Exactly. Damn. Because if the name was genuine, the conspiracy wasn't protected by influence. It was protected by authority. The highest kind. Authority capable of redirecting investigations, destroying evidence, promoting allies, silencing enemies. Authority capable of making entire cases disappear. Meg watched both men. Neither questioned the memory. Neither doubted the conclusion. That alone terrified her. A hunter emerged from the storm. Closer than expected. Caleb fired. The man collapsed. The others immediately shifted positions. Professional. Again. Everything about them screamed organization. Funding. Training. Command structure. Not hired guns. Something bigger. Something official. Kane noticed it too. And suddenly another realization struck him. A realization so obvious he almost missed it. The federal signals. The reconnaissance codes. The coordinated teams. The disciplined movement. His face went pale. "What is it?" Caleb asked. The marshal looked toward the approaching line. Then back toward him. "They not pretending." The words sounded strange. Confusing. Kane swallowed. The answer arrived slowly. Horribly. "They aren't posing as federal team." Silence. Then understanding. The men attacking them actually were federal operatives. Not all of them. Perhaps not even most of them. But enough. Enough to access equipment. Enough to access signals. Enough to access training. Enough to turn the government itself into a weapon. The implications were staggering. A bullet struck Kane's shoulder. The impact spun him sideways. Meg screamed. Caleb fired immediately. The shooter vanished behind snow-covered debris. Kane collapsed heavily. Blood spread quickly across his sleeve. The marshal gritted his teeth. Refused to cry out. Refused to surrender. Caleb checked the wound. Through and through. Painful. Not fatal. Yet. They know. Kane's voice sounded strained. Meg stared. Of course. The moment she remembered, everything changed. The hunters weren't trying to recover evidence anymore. They were trying to erase it. Completely. A sharp whistle echoed across the valley. The attackers stopped advancing. Instantly. Every man. Every position. Every rifle. They froze. The sudden discipline felt eerie. Unnatural. Then someone appeared atop a snow-covered ridge overlooking the entire valley. One figure. Tall. Well-dressed despite the storm. No rifle. No urgency. Only confidence. Absolute confidence. Meg's blood turned to ice, because she recognized him immediately. Elias Whitfield. He stood above them like a man attending a business meeting rather than a battlefield. The hunters parted slightly. Not out of respect. Out of obedience. That detail disturbed Caleb deeply, because Elias was commanding the operation. Yet they still followed his signals, meaning he represented someone important. Someone powerful. Elias removed his gloves, looked directly at Meg, then smiled. The same cold smile she had seen outside the hotel days earlier. Only now there was desperation hiding beneath it. The mask was cracking. Finally. You remember. Not a question. A statement. Meg rose before anyone could stop her. Anger overwhelmed caution. Yes. The smile faded. Good. For the first time since this nightmare began, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. Only a flicker. But it existed, and that meant he knew exactly how dangerous the truth had become. Elias looked toward Cain, then Caleb, then back toward Meg. Snow drifted between them. The entire valley seemed to hold its breath. Finally he spoke. Quietly, almost sadly. If you know the name. His gaze shifted toward the hunters surrounding the valley, then returned to her. Then none of us are leaving this mountain alone. For a long moment nobody moved. Snow drifted across the ruined valley. The hunters held position. Rifles ready. The wind moaned through shattered pines buried beneath avalanche debris, and Elias Whitfield stood above them, staring at Meg as though she carried a loaded weapon. Perhaps she did. Truth had become more dangerous than any rifle on the mountain. Meg met his gaze. For the first time since their marriage, she wasn't afraid of him. The realization surprised her. Years of manipulation, years of threats, years of carefully controlled humiliation. Gone. Not because he had changed, because she finally understood him. Elias Whitfield wasn't powerful. He was useful. There was a difference. And useful men became disposable when they failed. The thought clearly haunted him. You look tired. Elias. The words carried across the valley. His jaw tightened. Good. That tiny reaction felt better than she expected. You should stop. His voice sounded controlled. Measured. Practiced. Yet beneath the surface she heard something new. Desperation. The same desperation she had heard during the secret meeting. The same fear hidden beneath confidence. Meg almost smiled. Silence. The hunters watched. Cain watched. Caleb watched. Nobody interrupted. Because something important was happening. The balance had shifted. Elias sensed it too. His eyes moved toward the satchel beneath her coat. Toward the ledger. Toward the threat she represented. Then he made a mistake. A small mistake. The kind frightened men make. You don't understand who you refight. There. The sentence. The admission. Not denial. Not innocence. Confirmation. Meg stepped forward. The snow crunched beneath her boots. You mean the man whose name was circled in red? The effect was immediate. Elias' face lost colour. Only briefly. Only for a second. But everyone saw it. Everyone. Including the hunters. That mattered. Very much. Because discipline depended on confidence. Confidence depended on certainty. And suddenly uncertainty had entered the battlefield. Cain noticed several of the men exchange quick glances. Interesting. Very interesting. Perhaps not all of them knew who truly commanded the conspiracy. Perhaps some were merely following orders. That possibility created opportunity. Caleb recognized it too. His mind began working immediately, looking for weaknesses, pressure points. Anything. A path to survival. Elias recovered quickly. Too quickly. Years of deception had made him skilled. You should have stayed in Black Creek. Meg laughed. The sound surprised even her. Not because it was joyful. Because it was honest. For years she had swallowed every response. Every objection. Every truth. Not anymore. You tried to kill. Elias said nothing. You killed my father. Still nothing. You helped murder innocent people. The silence became louder. The hunters heard it. The mountains heard it. And silence can become testimony when denial never comes. Cain slowly rose despite his wound. Pain flashed across his face. He ignored it. Typical. That S. Elias looked toward him. The two men regarded one another across drifting snow. Old enemies. Though perhaps neither had realized it until now. The Marshal's voice hardened. What can know about Judge Voss? No reaction. Mort know about the bridge funds. A slight tightening around the eyes. There are surviving records. A flicker. Tiny. But real. Then Kane delivered the blow. And Mott know what happened to Agent Mal. The effect was dramatic. Elias froze. Completely froze. Meg saw it instantly. Caleb saw it too. Agent Mallory. A dead federal investigator mentioned in the documents. One of the people eliminated during the cover-up. Apparently his death carried significance. Kane smiled grimly. Got you. The Marshal continued. Before he died, Mallory left evidence. Lie. Almost certainly. But a good lie. A useful lie. Because Elias believed it. Meg could see the calculation beginning behind his eyes. Searching. Panicking. Trying to determine what evidence existed. Where it might be hidden. Who possessed it? That hesitation cost him. Because one of the hunters spoke. Not loudly. Not intentionally. But loudly enough. What evidence? The question changed everything. Elias turned sharply. Too sharply. Authority challenged. Control slipping. And suddenly Caleb understood the structure. These men weren't loyal. They were frightened. There was a difference. Loyal men protect leaders. Frightened men protect themselves. Very different battlefield. Very different weakness. Caleb stood. Rifle lowered. Not raised. Several hunters looked confused. Good. Confusion was useful. His voice carried across the valley. You know what happens next. Nobody answered. So he continued. The people funding this operation are already looking for someone to blame. A few expressions changed. Exactly as he hoped. Because it was true. Power always sacrificed pawn. Always. You think they look protect. One hunter looked away. Another shifted uneasily. A third lowered his rifle slightly. Caleb pressed harder. Ask yourselves one question. The valley became silent. Waiting. If they can kill federal agents. A pause. If they can kill judges. Another pause. If they can kill witnesses. His gaze swept across them. Why would they That landed. Hard. Very hard. Because everyone understood. Criminal conspiracies rewarded success. They buried failures. And today's operation had already become a disaster. Elias saw it happening. Saw the uncertainty spreading. Saw discipline weakening. For the first time genuine panic flashed across his face. Donta listened. Too late. The words sounded defensive. Weak. Desperate. Exactly the opposite of leadership. Then Kane spoke. And everything changed. Federal Marshal Everett Kane, his voice echoed across the valley. Strong despite the blood. Strong despite the wounds. Strong enough. Mottom officially invoking federal authority. Several hunters visibly stiffened. Training. Instinct. Years of conditioning. Kane pointed toward Elias. The man standing on that ridge is under investigation for conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of murder. Silence. The hunters stared. Nobody moved. Nobody fired. And that told Caleb everything. They weren't willing to die for Elias. Not anymore. Elias realized it too. The moment stretched. Fragile. Dangerous. Then one hunter lowered his rifle. Another followed. Then another. Not surrender. Not yet. But hesitation. Hesitation kills conspiracies. Elias S. face twisted, years of control collapsing in front of him. The word emerged almost as a whisper. Then louder. No. His voice cracked. The mask shattered completely. The respectable banker vanished. What remained was a terrified man watching power slip away. Meg felt no satisfaction. Only clarity. This was who he had always been. The illusion was finally gone. Then something unexpected happened. Elias laughed. Softly at first. Then harder. The sound chilled everyone. Because it was T-sane laughter. It was resignation. The laughter of a man who had reached the end. Slowly, he reached inside his coat. Every rifle in the valley moved instantly, including Caleb S., including the hunters, including Cain's revolver. Elias stopped, smiled, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not a weapon, a document. He held it up. The wind caught its edges. Meg S' breath stopped, because she recognized the paper immediately. One of the missing ledger pages. And Elias was holding it over the edge of a deep avalanche crevasse. The entire valley froze. Snow drifted through the air. Wind whispered across broken ridges. And Elias Whitfield stood above a dark crevasse holding one of the missing ledger pages. For a brief moment nobody breathed. Nobody moved, because everyone understood exactly what he intended. Destroy the evidence. If he couldn't survive, neither would the truth. His smile trembled, not from confidence, from desperation. You think you've... The paper shook slightly in his hand. Years of lies, years of murder, years of stolen fortunes, all balanced on a single sheet. Cain took one careful step forward. Elias laughed again. That strange, hollow laugh. The evidence dies with me. Meg's voice cut through the storm. Everyone turned toward her, including Elias. She stood calmly now, no longer running, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. The woman he had spent years underestimating was gone. Only the truth remained. You still don't understand. His eyes narrowed. The paper fluttered in the wind. Meg slowly removed the ledger from her satchel. Then another folded packet. Then another. Elias stared. Confusion appeared. Real confusion. For the first time. What is... Meg smiled. A small smile. A tired smile. A dangerous smile. The reason my father taught me bookkeeping. The valley fell silent. Meg opened the first packet. Pages covered in handwriting. Notes. Calculations. Cross-references. Account numbers. Transfer chains. Years of work. Years of observation. Years of preparation. Not her work. Her father S. What day ner to find the conspiracy when Mott found the ledger. Her voice carried clearly. Mott found it years ago. Elias S' face drained of colour. The realization struck him. Not immediately. Gradually. Like a blade sliding between ribs. Meg continued. My father knew someone would eventually destroy the record. The hunters listened. Cain listened. Caleb listened. Even the mountain seemed to listen. So he made copies. Silence. Absolute silence. The paper in Elias' hand suddenly looked much smaller. Much less important. Meg held up another packet. Then another. Copies of transfer. Another packet. Copies of shell accounts. Another. Copies of contract. Another. copies of signatures. The truth unfolded before the entire valley. Not one page. Not one ledger. Not one witness. Hundreds. Years of hidden evidence. Protected. Preserved. Waiting. Elias staggered backward. For the first time genuine terror consumed him. Not fear for his life. Fear for his legacy. His secrets. His power. Everything he had built. Gone. Meg looked directly at him. My father knew they would kill him. The words hit harder than any bullet. He just wanted to make sure they failed. Tears filled Elias' eyes. Not grief. Defeat. Complete defeat. The hunters saw it. Every one of them. The illusion shattered completely. Their leader wasn't powerful. He wasn't untouchable. He wasn't even winning. He was finished. A rifle hit the snow. One hunter dropped his weapon. Then another. Then another. The sound echoed softly through the valley. Metal against snow. Surrender. One after another. The conspiracy collapsed not through violence, but through certainty. Truth. Evidence. Proof. Exactly as Meg's father had intended. Cain smiled. A weary smile. The kind worn by men who survive long enough to see justice. Federal authority would return. Witnesses would testify. Records would be recovered. Trials would follow. Not quickly. Not easily. But they would come. The system had failed. Now it would finally be forced to look at itself. Elias looked around. At the surrendered hunters. At Cain. At Meg. Then finally at Caleb. The mountain man met his gaze without emotion. No hatred. No triumph. Just judgment. Elias understood. His shoulders slumped. Years seemed to fall onto him all at once. The paper slipped from his fingers. The wind caught it. The missing page spiraled into the valley below. Nobody chased it. Nobody cared. Because it no longer mattered. The truth already existed elsewhere. The game was over. 2 days later, federal reinforcements arrived. A week later, arrests began. A month later, newspapers across the territories carried the story. The Bridge Conspiracy. 37 confirmed death. Financial corruption. Government interference. Destroyed investigations. Dozens charged. More discovered. The shock reached all the way to Washington. And for the first time in years, people started asking questions powerful men did want answered. Spring arrived slowly in the Bitterroots. Snow retreated. Rivers thawed. Grass returned. Life returned. The mountains endured. As they always had. Meg remained in the mountains. Not because she was hiding. Because she finally had a choice. For the first time in years, every choice belonged to her. The cabin Caleb built sat above a small valley filled with wildflowers. The roof no longer leaked. The fence stood straight. Smoke curled from the chimney. Home. A simple word. A complicated thing. One evening Meg sat on the porch reviewing inventory records for a nearby trading post. Bookkeeping. Still numbers. Still truth. Some things never changed. Caleb emerged carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He sat beside her. The sunset painted the mountains gold. Neither spoke immediately. They never needed to. Silence had become comfortable between them. A shared language. Eventually Meg smiled. Caleb looked over. When Mort first met you, Mort thought you were the most difficult man in the territory. Only the territory. She laughed. The sound echoed across the valley. Warm. alive, real. Caleb smiled too. A rare sight, still worth waiting for. Below them, spring wind moved through fresh grass. The world felt different now. Not perfect. Never perfect. But honest. And honesty was enough. Meg leaned back in her chair. The mountains stretched endlessly beyond the horizon. No hunters. No secrets. No fear. Only possibility. After a moment, Caleb reached over and quietly took her hand. Not dramatically. Not urgently. Just naturally. Like two people who had crossed a very long road together. Meg squeezed his fingers. Neither said anything. They did need to. Because some promises live more comfortably in actions than words. The sun dipped lower. The valley glowed. And far below, where snow once buried truth and fear ruled powerful men, new grass was already growing. The mountains remembered everything, but they also knew how to heal. And as evening settled over the Bitterroots, Caleb Hurst and Meg Whitfield sat side by side before a home they had earned together, watching the last light touch the land that had nearly taken everything from them and had ultimately given them a future.